In the history of crime, few cases define a conflict of evidence quite like this one. In 1998, after a swift trial in Idaho Falls, the jury delivered its verdict. The case was closed. Christopher Tapp was convicted of the rape and murder of Angie Dodge. He was sentenced to life in prison. But this was only the beginning of the true crime, because the man who brutally killed Angie was still walking free. The police had a confession. After weeks of interrogation, Tapp admitted to his involvement. It was the crucial piece of evidence. Yet the physical evidence found at the scene, the semen left by the perpetrator, told a different story. It produced a complete genetic profile of a single male. That profile was tested against Tapp. It did not match. He was convicted on his words despite the science. The police had a conviction, but the killer's DNA was still searching for a name. And for the next 2 decades, that DNA remained an open, unanswerable question. June 13, 1996. The focus often falls on the trial and the evidence, but this story begins with Angie Dodge. She was just 18 years old. She was an Idaho Falls kid, full of spirit, excited to be starting her life. Angie had recently graduated from high school and secured a job at a local beauty supply company. She was finding her footing, making her own money, and she had just achieved the milestone of moving into her own place, an apartment just blocks from her family. This was her first taste of genuine independence. She took pride in choosing her own furniture and decorating her space, a small sanctuary where she was finally calling the shots, deciding what kind of adult she would become. She was exactly where she was supposed to be, on the cusp of adulthood. She was a reliable young woman, dependable at work, and deeply connected to her mother, Carol. When she didn't show up for her morning shift that Thursday, her co-workers knew immediately that something was wrong. Angie was never late. This sudden, unexplained absence raised immediate alarms among her co-workers. What happened next shattered the quiet safety of their community and forever changed the life of Angie's mother, Carol Dodge. While the police launched a massive investigation to find the killer, the entire town mourned the loss of a young woman whose life was stolen before it truly began. For Carol Dodge, the search for justice began the minute the police arrived. A search that would ultimately take her on a 20-year journey to challenge the very conviction that was supposed to bring her daughter peace. She would become the tireless voice for the one piece of evidence the town had chosen to ignore: the DNA. It was the morning of June the 13th, 1996. Angie's manager and a co-worker stood on the porch of the 14th Street address. A friend knocks on her door. No answer. They tried the handle. It was unlocked. The silence inside felt wrong. It was too heavy, too complete. They stepped inside, calling her name. They walked past the small living room, the space Angie had been so excited to furnish. The apartment was undisturbed, yet something was fundamentally out of place. The discovery in the bedroom was devastating. Angie Dodge had been brutally stabbed 14 times. The crime scene was immediately declared a homicide. The Idaho Falls Police Department descended upon the quiet street. The scale of the response was immense, drawing investigators and forensic experts from across the region. They worked with extreme care, determined to recover every single piece of evidence from the small apartment. The entire community was locked down by shock and fear. The forensic team's primary focus was the biological evidence. They quickly secured a substantial, clean sample of semen left by the perpetrator. Even in 1996, they knew this was the key. They had what experts would later call a pristine DNA profile, a complete genetic signature of the man responsible for the sexual assault. This DNA was immediately logged into evidence, carrying the absolute identity of the killer. Within days, the detectives began a massive effort to interview and collect voluntary DNA samples from dozens of men who knew Angie. They were confident this powerful genetic clue would quickly deliver them the answer they needed. They had the DNA, they just needed the match. The investigation had officially begun. But the killer's profile was not in the database, and the DNA samples collected from early suspects proved useless. The evidence they collected was perfect. The intention of the investigators was absolute, but what they would ultimately find and what they would choose to believe would raise more questions than answers. Weeks passed with no connection. The CODIS database offered no leads. The initial suspects were eliminated one by one, and the police found themselves in an agonizing position, holding the killer's DNA but unable to put a name to it. The public pressure became immense. The investigation was stalled. Detectives were forced to widen their criteria, shifting their focus from men close to Angie to anyone with a tenuous connection to the neighborhood. They pursued dozens of dead ends until a witness provided a lead concerning a young man who had been in the general area on the night of the murder. Christopher Tapp. He was brought in for questioning as a person of interest. Tapp was 20 years old, living nearby, and was nervous, easily confused, and had documented cognitive limitations. His initial interviews were tentative and full of inconsistencies about his whereabouts on the night of June 13, 1996. Detectives applied immense, sustained pressure, believing he was, at minimum, an accomplice. The police knew Tapp was not the DNA match. They knew the genetic profile excluded him from being the primary assailant. But they continued the questioning, urging him to admit to an involvement they believed existed. On March 10, 1997, after numerous hours of interrogation, Christopher Tapp broke. He gave the detectives the crucial piece of evidence they wanted, a confession of his involvement in the rape and murder of Angie Dodge. The investigators had secured their conviction. Tapp was indicted. The search for the killer was officially closed by the state of Idaho. Yet, the absolute, unassailable DNA evidence, the genetic profile of the man who left his identity at the crime scene, still pointed a finger at a suspect who remained anonymous and untouchable. Tapp was heading to prison, but the man the science named was still free. Christopher Tapp's confession closed the murder investigation for the Idaho Falls Police Department. But how that confession was ultimately obtained became the most controversial and devastating chapter of the entire case. Over the course of the next year, from 1996 into early 1997, Tapp was subjected to an unprecedented level of questioning, over 25 hours, across numerous extended sessions. Tapp, a young man with documented cognitive limitations and a limited education, sat alone. Crucially, he was never provided legal counsel during these marathon interviews. The strategy was relentless. Detectives repeatedly presented Tapp with graphic, unreleased details of the crime scene, details he had no way of knowing. This created a forced scenario. Tapp felt the only way out of the room was to incorporate those facts into a story of his own involvement. Under the overwhelming pressure, Tapp's accounts twisted and fractured. He changed his story again and again, inventing and discarding names of accomplices, describing locations he hadn't been to, and offering timelines that didn't fit the evidence, because that's what they wanted. Every contradiction led to more pressure, cementing the police theory that there had to be two men, the DNA donor and the confessed accomplice. The confession was secured, trading a potential death penalty for a life sentence. But when a scared, confused young man tells police exactly what they want to hear, the critical question remains: was this the truth or survival? On March 10, 1997, the agony that had gripped Idaho Falls for nearly a year finally broke. Police officials stood before the cameras and announced the definitive end to the investigation. They had secured a conviction against Christopher Tapp. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. For the community, and most importantly for Carol Dodge, there was a profound sense of relief, a burden lifted. After months of terror, the city could finally grieve properly. The official narrative was simple. Tapp, the accomplice, had revealed the truth, allowing justice to finally begin. The confession video was aired publicly. People watched as a young man detailed a version of the events, giving them the story that matched the police's theory of a crime involving multiple people. The town felt closure. The confession became the cornerstone of the state's case, a seemingly ironclad link to the crime that superseded all other physical evidence. But even as the public accepted the narrative of shared guilt, a troubling reality persisted just beneath the surface. Tapp's shifting testimony was the only connection. He consistently struggled to recall basic, verifiable facts about the apartment layout, the murder weapon, and even the victim's name. Details only the true killer would know. The story was told, but the physical DNA of the primary assailant, the man Tapp was supposedly assisting, remained untouched, unmatched, and scientifically certain. They had the confession, but they still did not have the whole truth. The conviction of Christopher Tapp brought official closure to Idaho Falls, but even the prosecution was forced to grapple with a fact that scientifically stood alone. The complete, undisputed DNA profile found on Angie Dodge's body did not belong to Christopher Tapp. He was definitively excluded as the source of the biological evidence. This fundamental conflict demanded an explanation. The police and prosecutors were in the unusual position of arguing for a conviction while simultaneously acknowledging a separate, unidentified male's DNA was at the center of the crime. Their solution was to pivot the narrative. The defense argued the DNA exclusion proved Tapp's innocence, claiming the confession was coerced and unreliable. The prosecution countered with a theory designed to bridge the chasm between the evidence. Tapp was an accomplice. He was there, he participated in the crime. But the unidentified DNA donor was the man who committed the sexual assault and ultimately the murder. The confession, they argued, proved Tapp's presence and guilt, regardless of the physical evidence. It was an argument built on circumstantial logic, not science. The forensic evidence was dismissed as merely supporting the second assailant theory, an unproven individual Tapp's constantly changing stories had failed to definitively name. For the state of Idaho, the uncertainty presented by the forensic science was overcome by the perceived certainty of the oral admission. They had the confession, and that was enough. Christopher Tapp was sentenced to life in prison. The trial was over. Justice, they believed, had been delivered. But the facts remained defiant. The man who had left his complete genetic signature in Angie Dodge's apartment was still free. And Christopher Tapp, convicted against the grain of the most critical piece of forensic evidence, had just begun a life sentence for a crime the very science said he could not have committed alone. The state had its closure, but it wasn't the truth. In the wake of the conviction, while the rest of Idaho Falls closed the door on the Angie Dodge case, one person could not. Carol Dodge, Angie's mother, had suffered the ultimate loss, but her grief was soon sharpened into an uncompromising determination. For Carol, the closure offered by the court was false. She looked at the DNA report, the piece of paper that stated unequivocally that Christopher Tapp was not the sole killer, and she saw an enduring injustice. How could she rest knowing the man who had left his calling card in her daughter's apartment remained unidentified? She knew the true killer was still out there, possibly watching the town accept a lie. Carol became obsessed with the DNA. She taught herself the intricacies of forensic science, the legal procedures, and the appeal process. She began reaching out to experts and innocence organizations. She was no longer just a mother. She transformed into a relentless cold case investigator, dedicating her entire life to contradicting the very conviction that was meant to grant her peace. Her actions were driven by two powerful beliefs. First, the promise to her murdered daughter that the man responsible would be held accountable. And second, the growing certainty that an innocent man, Christopher Tapp, was languishing in prison because the police had focused on his words instead of the science. She lost her daughter, but refused to lose justice. For Carol Dodge, the fight for Angie's memory had evolved into a fight for truth itself. Her quest would take decades, consuming her life, yet she would not waver in the face of institutional resistance. The years stretched into a decade, and then more. Christopher Tapp, convicted on the weight of a coerced confession, served his sentence in the Idaho State Penitentiary. While the state considered the case closed, Tapp's appeals were systematically denied. He remained the convenient answer to a brutal crime, despite the genetic truth locked away in the evidence room. But as the years passed, the facts of the case, the conflicting evidence, the lengthy, uncounseled interrogations, and the absolute DNA exclusion began to gnaw at the conscience of Idaho Falls. Carol Dodge's tireless advocacy, once a solitary pursuit, began to resonate. Journalists started re-examining the documents. The community, which had initially demanded swift justice, started to ask, did we get the right man? The focus shifted from Tapp's alleged guilt to the integrity of his conviction. Organizations dedicated to overturning wrongful convictions stepped forward. The Idaho Innocence Project, among others, took on Tapp's cause, dedicating resources to scrutinize the interrogation tapes and the forensic testimony. The movement gained momentum, fueled by the unwavering stance of Angie's own mother, Carol. The quest for justice was now twofold: free an innocent man, and finally identify the guilty one. A growing wave of public doubt forced the case back into the light, demanding a deeper, more rigorous search. For Carol Dodge, the fight had become a legal and moral battle fought on behalf of both her daughter and the man wrongly accused of her murder. The true answer remained elusive, hidden in the genetic code of an unknown assailant. But after nearly 2 decades of failed appeals and ignored science, the question that hung heavy over the state of Idaho was, how many innocent men spend their lives paying for someone else's crime? By the mid-2010s, nearly 2 decades after Angie's murder, a revolutionary new forensic technology emerged: genetic genealogy. This process didn't just match an unknown DNA sample to criminal databases like CODIS. It allowed investigators to upload the genetic profile to public genealogy websites, searching for distant family members of the killer. It was a breakthrough that offered the only potential way to finally put a name to the DNA left in Angie's apartment. For Carol Dodge, this new science was the ultimate weapon. After years of demanding that the Idaho Falls Police Department re-examine the evidence, she found powerful allies in the legal system and the Idaho Innocence Project. Her relentless pressure finally succeeded in getting the critical DNA sample submitted for this advanced testing. The process was an exercise in patience, grit, and precision. Scientists uploaded the unique genetic profile and began building a family tree from distant cousins. The work involved mapping hundreds of connections, cross-referencing public records, and narrowing down a vast field of possibilities to a single family line. This was the Hail Mary pass, the one chance to find the truth, the name that the justice system had failed to deliver. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, as the team painstakingly followed every lead generated by the familial connections. Every single branch of the growing family tree was a new potential path toward the identity of Angie's killer. The search was arduous, often leading to frustrating dead ends. But the DNA, the cold, silent witness to the crime, could not lie. The scientists kept working, driven by the absolute certainty that the killer's identity was hiding somewhere within the vast network of human genetics. The investigators had the scientific proof. They just needed the methodology to find the man. In May 2019, after years of Christopher Tapp's imprisonment and tireless work by advocates and volunteers, the team had success. The investigative search concluded. A final definitive genetic link was established. The name that surfaced from the genetic genealogy database was not connected to Christopher Tapp. The DNA trail, meticulously mapped across public family trees, led investigators to one man, Brian Lee Drips. Drips was 53 years old when he was identified. In 1996, at the time of Angie Dodge's murder, he lived less than a block away from her apartment on 14th Street in Idaho Falls. He was a familiar face in the neighborhood, a man who went completely unnoticed by the original investigation. While Christopher Tapp was being interrogated and ultimately convicted, sentenced to a life behind bars, Brian Drips was living his life, raising a family, remaining free within the community. The contrast was staggering. For 23 years, Christopher Tapp suffered the crushing weight of a false conviction, while the true perpetrator, Drips, was allowed to live without consequence, simply because his DNA was never in the official criminal system. Carol Dodge, who had fought for decades for the DNA to be properly recognized, learned that the man who killed her daughter had been hiding in plain sight the entire time. On May 10, 2019, investigators approached Brian Drips. He voluntarily provided a new DNA sample that was swiftly tested against the 1996 evidence. The result was absolute, a perfect, undeniable match. The unidentified profile, the one piece of evidence that had always told the true story, finally had a name. When confronted with the evidence, Brian Dripps confessed to the rape and murder of Angie Dodge. He acted alone. Tapp's confession was a lie told under duress. The genetic truth, ignored for so long, had finally shattered the foundation of a 23-year-old conviction. Christopher Tapp was not an accomplice. He was innocent. The man who had taken Angie Dodge's life was an anonymous neighbor all along. After 23 years, the truth finally surfaced. Dripps was brought in for questioning. He was placed in an interview room and calmly presented with the truth. The genetic profile of the man who raped and murdered Angie Dodge in 1996 was his. The weight of 23 years of freedom was suddenly placed on the table. He initially denied everything, grasping at the anonymity he had enjoyed for so long. But the detectives were armed with irrefutable science and the knowledge that the man they had wrongly convicted, Christopher Tapp, was now free to tell his story. The timeline collapsed. Dripps's denial was short-lived. In that small room, the truth, so long obscured by a false confession and legal missteps, was finally delivered by the man responsible. Dripps confirmed he acted alone. He lived less than a block from Angie's apartment on 14th Street, having seen her and acted on impulse. He confessed to breaking into her apartment and carrying out the attack. His words, years too late, verified the innocence of Christopher Tapp and closed the physical investigation into the murder of Angie Dodge. A single scientific breakthrough had delivered the identity of the true killer and the exoneration of an innocent man. The confession echoed across Idaho, ending a legacy of injustice. Justice had been delayed, but not denied. The confession of Brian Dripps immediately triggered the legal process to correct one of the most glaring miscarriages of justice in Idaho history. On July 17, 2019, 23 years after he was first taken into custody, Christopher Tapp walked into a courtroom for the last time as a convicted man. The motion was clear, with the true assailant identified by DNA and confirmed by his own admission. Tapp's entire conviction for the rape and murder of Angie Dodge was vacated. The forced confession, the core of the state's original case, was now legally recognized as unreliable and false. It was a powerful scene of redemption, but one shadowed by the profound injustice that preceded it. Tapp was led out of the courtroom, not back to the cell blocks, but toward the sunlight and the waiting embrace of his family. The emotional reunion with his mother, Vicky Tapp, and his staunchest advocate, Carol Dodge, was a moment of transcendent grace. They had fought, often alone, against the entire legal system. Now their fight was affirmed. But as Christopher Tapp stepped onto the street, now a man in his 40s, he was faced with a world that had moved on without him. He had lost his youth, his independence, and over 2 decades of his life. Freedom felt strange, like stepping out of someone else's nightmare. For Carol Dodge, the discovery of the true killer and the exoneration of Christopher Tapp was not the end of her mission. It was the catalyst for a new crusade. Having experienced firsthand how institutional errors and outdated procedures can shatter lives, she transformed her personal tragedy into a campaign for justice reform across Idaho. Her focus became legislative change. She joined forces with the Idaho Innocence Project and other exonerees, using the weight of Angie's case to push for critical legal protections. She lobbied for mandatory recording of interrogations in felony cases, a measure designed to prevent the kind of coerced, unreliable confessions that put Tapp behind bars. She also advocated for clearer, more consistent rules governing the preservation and testing of DNA evidence in cold cases. Carol's tireless advocacy redefined what it means to seek justice for a murder victim. She honored Angie's memory, not by demanding revenge, but by fighting for a system that was fundamentally fair to everyone, including the man wrongfully accused. Her courage was unique. She chose truth over easy closure, and in doing so, she became the protector of her daughter's true legacy. A mother's love solved the case the system couldn't. The exoneration of Christopher Tapp and the conviction of Brian Drips ultimately brought closure to the murder of Angie Dodge. But the case remains a stark object lesson in how the pursuit of justice can falter. The central failure lies in the danger of coerced confessions. Tapp was a vulnerable individual whose words, extracted under intense and lengthy pressure, were deemed more credible than the absolute science of DNA evidence. This fundamental misstep led the system to protect a killer and imprison an innocent man for over 2 decades. The truth was always present, sealed inside a tiny vial of evidence. It took the advent of genetic genealogy, the incredible power of technology to map human identity across generations, to finally correct the error of human judgment. This revolutionary technique did not just solve a cold case. It proved that science must be the highest authority in forensic investigations. It underscored how critical modern technology is in resolving the deep flaws of past investigative practices. The fact that it took 23 years for the truth to surface, that a mother's relentless campaign and the rise of a new science were needed to undo a wrongful life sentence, speaks volumes about the fragility of justice. Time can hide the wicked, but it can also expose systemic neglect. The tragedy of Angie Dodge is compounded by the tragedy of Christopher Tapp, a reminder that a system fixated on expediency can destroy lives even as it seeks to protect them. The final answer arrived, but the cost was immense. If it could happen to Chris, how many more stories are still waiting to be rewritten? Angie's story is one of profound loss, but it is also a story of truth, perseverance, and eventual redemption. The fight of a mother, Carol Dodge, to clear an innocent man and find her daughter's killer forced an entire system to confront its failures. It redefined justice, proving that the integrity of evidence must always supersede the convenience of a confession. It is a powerful testament to the idea that the truth, no matter how long it takes, cannot be suppressed forever. What do you think justice really means in a world where truth can hide for 23 years? Share your thoughts below and subscribe for more true stories that uncover what lies beneath the surface.